Welcome to the January 16th, 2024 Warren Township High School 121 regular school board meeting. Let's start it off, please, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Motion by Carlson, second by Anderson. Mr. DeMonte?
Yes.
Mrs. Squires?
Yes.
Mrs. Pope?
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Carlson?
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Do we have any recognitions? I don't see anything here. Okay, public comment. Visitors are allowed up to 3 minutes to address the Board of Education. Please see the brochure at the table at the entrance to the meeting room on addressing the board. Do we have any public comment? I have no notice. Going. I'm looking at you. Gone.
No pressure.
No pressure. Okay. Committee reports. Superintendent's report. Danny.
All right, I do have a couple items in here I want to just draw some attention to. I provided the board with an update, just a summary of feedback that we've gotten on the mascot logo feedback sessions. We did feedback sessions with a whole bunch of students, and I had some student leaders that helped me with that. We don't have students here tonight just because of the snow day. They're taking the whole day off. But we had some students lead some feedback sessions in classes and help me during lunches. Then we had some student leaders that also helped run some feedback sessions with some student athlete and athletic groups, as well as some of our coaches and club advisors. And then I did some lunch feedback sessions with staff members. So our next step on that, and we're just looking again to most likely do a facelift on the current Blue Devil. Sometimes people call it the Smurf Blue Devil. So that's
Looks like a
specifically
Smurf.
what we're looking at. I also have a report in here that I committed to providing as part of our first year of the new strategic plan around graduation requirements. So a handful of years ago, the board, because of a few factors, some of it was impact of COVID, some of it was the likelihood of reducing the day by one period. A couple different factors went into deciding to reduce our graduation requirements. And I do think that now that we're out of the pandemic, at least the climax of the pandemic and the impact that that's had on students, and the fact that we didn't end up needing to reduce the school day by a period is a reason for the board to look at graduation requirements and decide whether or not the board is still comfortable with the graduation requirements as they stand. So we put together just some general information about graduation requirements. If we were going to make a change in graduation requirements, you would, in most cases, you would make it for an incoming class of freshmen. You wouldn't change graduation requirements for students that are freshmen, sophomores, juniors in the middle of their high school career. And we'd probably do that most likely with the course guide and new course proposals that happens in the fall. But we should start, I would encourage you to start thinking about that as we have conversations over the next 6 months, whether they're graduation requirement related or maybe they're not. You just with, if they're directly graduation requirement related or if they're not directly related, you might find some reasons why something like or talking about graduation requirements might be indirectly related. For example, when we talk about career pathways, as career pathways continues to be a conversation in the future, you could talk about you could ask yourself, how do career pathways and the idea of career pathways, how could that interplay with graduation requirements? There might also be some different types of data that you want me to provide for you when we're talking about graduation requirements, so that when we get there in 6 months, you've got everything you need to talk about that.
Yeah, I think that, so I'm not 100% sure why we would be concerned about, the 18 and a half as opposed to the 22. Because the people that want to take 22 are still taking 22. So I
Correct.
think the curious information for me would be how many people are still way over that 18 and a half.
Yeah.
And the other number that would be interesting is how many people get to graduate because they got the 18 and a half.
Yeah.
And they would not have had that opportunity otherwise.
I'll add to that. Some of the discussion was about people graduating early. I'd be interested to know how many credits they're graduating with. Are they right at the 18, or, are they beyond that? I mean, there's nothing that's prohibiting anyone from taking more than 18. I know
Right.
that there's been some discussion about, our discussions about freshmen on track and the need for maybe, some types of programming or looking at the freshman year for people, and I don't know what that all looks like either. So I would be interested to hear from anybody about, does packing a student's schedule with more requirements help them to, if they're struggling, becoming a freshman on track? So I'm kind of concerned. I don't know if that came out right, but what I mean
No,
is.
that's exactly what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I know.
Are we hurting more people than we're helping
Exactly.
by raising it, which we're still above the state at 18 and a half. We're way above it at 22. So I think that, is there a perception about the school if we have lower graduation requirements, we're less of a academic institution? Do you think that's a thing? I'm just asking. I don't have any idea.
I think internally that's a thing. Internally, some staff feel like we've lowered expectations, and that's not a good sign to students. I did look at just this afternoon, and I can send it to the board. Every year, the College Admissions Counseling Association puts out what are the factors that college admission counselors or college admission professionals are saying that they're considering when they're looking at admitting students. And I don't see a number of graduation requirements or rigor of the high school. I do see rigor of the types of classes that they take and how well they do in those classes. I need to look into that some more. But there definitely is an internal perception. A lot of staff feel like, by a lot, I mean more than one. But when we were doing focus groups last year, a lot of staff mentioned frustration around the lowering of expectations that they felt like had happened.
That makes sense to me, because when we look at this list of graduation requirements for other, comparable schools, and we're at the bottom by a lot, I think that suggests that it looks like we're not challenging the kids to explore and try and that kind of thing. If there's a benefit to it, that it creates space for kids who need time to retake a class or time to get sports or something, then I can see where that would be a benefit. But if we're not getting a benefit like that, I think we might want to, we dropped it by like a class a year for your entire high school career, which seems significant.
But nobody's preventing them from taking those classes.
No, but it means when they meet with a guidance counselor, they're saying, well, in order to graduate on time, here's what you have to do, which when you're a high school student can make a big difference in what you expect of yourself.
Possibly. Every time we've had discussions regarding children that are struggling, the common concern I get back is there's not enough time in a day to catch a student up. And I don't worry about the people like my son who's going to take the classes he feels like he needs to take and, expand his schedule to the max, sometimes over, right? But it's how, are we leaving enough room to work with the students that need the help that we're seeing in the statistics we were concerned about at the beginning of the year? And if that is going to be detrimental, to your point, I'd like to hear opinions about that, maybe from the staff that are concerned or the administration or whomever. But I'd love to hear a debate about it, because my biggest concern right now is not the kids that are excelling and want to go to college and looking at college admission, expectations. It's the kids that need time to make sure they're passing freshman year.
I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking we should have lower requirements to offer the most flexibility. But why are all these other schools higher? What are the ramifications?
Well, we used to be there too.
But I mean, why haven't they followed our lead and lowered them if this is such a wonderful idea?
I think they did at some point, so they may have raised them. I think some schools raised them after COVID, right?
I don't
thought I
know
heard
that
that.
specifically. I believe that there were likely schools that lowered them for COVID and then put them back up to where
That's
they
what
were
I'm saying,
pre-COVID.
yeah.
I want to know why they put them back up, what their rationale was. I'd also like to be interested in this has been danced around, but are there any ramifications to this institution in terms of funding or grants or anything else in terms of what your graduation requirements are? If there aren't, that's fine, but
I don't believe there are any financial ramifications. I do believe that many school boards do put a high emphasis on the perception of the school and what do we look like compared to other schools in terms of our expectations for students. And I think the hard question here is if a school board raises graduation requirements, will all students respond to that? Or if they lower the graduation requirements, does it help more students get past the bar? And are we okay with a different bar?
So my understanding is we lower the requirements because of COVID and finances, not because we thought it was.
Correct.
Creating
That's
space
my
for
impression
somebody.
as well. That's correct, yes.
So I think if we're going to keep them where they are, I'd want to know that it's being useful to somebody.
I think that's where you gotta look at how many students are graduating between 18 and a half and 22. How many? Is it 10? Is it 100? Is it 200? And of those students, how have they performed? What is their GPA? We don't need their names, just what is their GPA?
Data.
Is this, are these students, are we helping these students get out of high school? Or they're just, some of them are just gonna be lazy and not take the classes. Some of them actually need the help. What is that? Is that a very low number or is it I don't know.
well, related to that though, your expectations. I mean, if you know that you only need 18 and a half,
You're only gonna do 18.
You're gonna be hitting 18 and a half. but
I
if you-
wouldn't say that's the
But
majority
how many
or
of those
even.
people
But if you-
wouldn't graduate?
Well, okay.
They just leave.
But if you know from the get-go that you need a higher number, wouldn't you be more likely to try to hit that higher number?
Not if you're failing your math and your English.
It all depends on, it's all relative.
And
The question is,
I
are
will
we-
look this up. I'll
Right.
bring more
That's what we
information
need.
about this.
Just the
Okay.
data would be enough to say, okay, it has done some good, or no, it's not doing it. It's just,
Yeah.
And if we keep them low, I'd like to see it connected with what you talked about in terms of, vocational and job training and that sort of thing, and more flexibility to learn the real world.
This is great. I have probably 12 or 13 things I can
Yeah, good luck
go
with
back and
that,
do
yeah.
some work on.
okay.
Interesting that there's only 7 of us, but you had 12 or 14.
One point of clarification probably is when we changed the graduation requirements, the impact was on the elective courses. So the 4 years of English, 3 years of science, 3 years of math, those requirements stayed the same. So we're mostly then probably looking at the electives and the impact of the electives.
And I just want to also say, I'm not as interested in what other districts are doing as much as I'm interested in we're doing the right things for our students and our student population and what's going on within our building and our classes. So, I understand we have data here regarding graduation requirements of other schools, but, we also are there at the freshman on track way on the low side. And not all those schools have that. So
Correct.
we probably need to make sure we right size for our school and not worry so much about everyone else.
Let me make it clear, and I don't mean to imply, that the reason I bring it up is because they've had this discussion, and I'd like to hear why they did what they did. That's all I'm saying.
Fair.
Okay,
That,
this thing is microscopic and my eyes are old, and so I missed something. The
nope,
parent-
you didn't. I got a couple more things under superintendent report section.
Well, I got the parent-teacher advisory committee that I jumped over, so we'll finish
Got
with
it,
you, we'll go
okay.
back to them.
Let's see, I do have in here, let's see, the 6-month board meeting planning schedule. So we're just I'm trying to get better at making sure that you have things ahead of time. And a couple board members had asked about, hey, well, when do we do this and when do we do that? So we'll try to get this to you every few months so you can see what's coming up. And then we have a special education department report. So Mr. Carlson, go ahead.
I have a question about the calendar.
Yeah.
I think meeting the week of Thanksgiving is wrong.
Yeah, let's cut that out.
God, you're talking about next year's calendar?
Yes.
Okay, so under the superintendent's report is the rest of this year's meeting calendar.
I want to talk about next year's.
That's here for discussion. You got to wait half an hour for that.
There's a couple lines down there, Carlson.
'Cause-
Yeah.
wait.
But
what'd you
that is
say?
why we've got it in discussion,
call
so
me
you can talk
Carlson?
through it.
Go
Get
read
outta
the
here.
agenda down a little further, you'll find it.
But I missed B.
Yeah, we know.
You want me to go
Yeah,
back to
we can
B,
go
or
back to
you
B.
want to finish this?
Let's go back to B. Let's go back to B.
Okay, I missed B altogether, so let's go back to B. Parent-teacher advisory committee meeting report?
We don't have anything to add to the notes. We did try to put a draft copy of the minutes in there so you can start to see those before they're formally approved.
Okay, any comments or questions on that?
Not for me.
Back on schedule. Okay, monthly reports, school board meeting schedule we covered, 6-month board meeting. Treasurer's report be next, or am I missing something?
Monthly reports.
I don't have anything specific for monthly reports through treasurer's report, but we do have a department report for special education.
Anybody have any question on the discipline report or the enrollment report or the freedom of information document? Nothing. on that?
Treasurer's report, I appreciated getting the last month's numbers included so we could see how the actual varied from the estimated, so I thought that was helpful.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you very
agree.
much.
Okay, any other questions on the treasurer's report or any of these?
Nope.
Okay, department report, special education.
All right, I'm going to have our friends from Catalyst for Educational Change come up. If you remember back when we were in the black box, so it would have been in July or August, the board approved an audit or assessment of our special education program. And I'll let these individuals introduce themselves and give them the clicker. But they've been working with us for a handful of months and are here. They've already given us their findings. They're going to report their findings to the school board. We're not coming to you with an action plan based on this tonight. We're just giving you the information. And then most likely we'll want to continue to have conversation internally and then possibly at curriculum committee meetings coming up.
So this is their report, and you're going to come back to us with a plan of action based on it? Correct. Okay.
Good evening. I was told I have to make sure and speak into the microphone. Did I do good?
Yep.
Hi, Shelley Taylor with the Catalyst for Educational Change. And I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself.
I'm Janelle Miraz, and I'm also with the Catalyst for Educational Change.
So in your board pack, you do have the PowerPoint that we're going to be going through, which is the brief overview of the larger report. So you do have both of those. We're going to refer to the larger report, but not bring those pieces up. All right, so just a quick reminder, the purpose, and I know that you were aware of this, that this was happening. We started this in September, the Special Ed's Needs Assessment. But the purpose of our work that we did in partnership with your organization was threefold. So first was just to determine current successes and challenges of the current special education programming, service delivery, placements, and instructional practices. The second was the overall climate and tone among stakeholders, ensuring stakeholder voice. I know that in particular was a board directive. As it relates to operationalizing the special education programming, service delivery, placements, and instructional practices. And then the third one would be recommendations for possible enhancements and future funding allocation considerations for the special education programming placements, including outplacements. Again, that was also something that the board had asked for us to take a look at, and resources to optimize positive results for students. So that was the purpose of what we were focused on. Our process that the Catalyst for Educational Change uses is research-based from the Baldrige Continuous Improvement Framework. We use that as sort of our backdrop. And there are really 4 phases, as you see on the screen. So the first phase is to do an overview, most especially making sure that the stakeholders that are impacted by the process understand what's happening. We never like to come in and do things to people and have them be like, what's going on? Why are these people here? So we like to give a clear overview of what the process is, and I would say most especially what the process is not, so that people don't start to sort of jump to conclusions about things. The second part is a data review. So we started with an IEP review. We did spent a full day reviewing 50 randomized IEPs for certain specific things that we look for that match your purposes that we had just mentioned. And then Janelle and I also conducted program walkthroughs. The program walkthroughs mean that we want to benchmark all of your courses. So we'll just take one course, English 1, for example. We want to see not just the special education placements, but all of the placements that are possible, so we could start to see what does this really look like. So that first data dive is, what does the program look like in an IEP on paper? What do we actually see in the classrooms, and how is that different from the other placement options within those programs? And then the third one then becomes the focus group sessions. And those are virtual sessions where we do put role-alike participants together in a room. We ask a set of guiding questions that everyone gets the entire guidebook of the questions. So even if you're, say, a teacher group, you're going to see the questions that the administrators got that anybody got. So everyone, it's very a transparent process. All of the questions are aligned, again, to be able to pick data points, and so each of these then lead us to finding trends. So what are the trends that we discovered in those 3 data points? We also pair that with other data sources to get to delivery of findings. And so real quick, and this is on page 22 and 23, there were other data sources, and then all of the data sources we talked about, you can see the compilation in that full report. So when you get out your magnifying glasses and you can start to see the small print on some of those, you'll be able to see exactly what we were able to come up with in terms of finding trends with the data. One special notation I do want to make is that in this particular needs assessment process, your focus group sessions, the recruitment was overly challenging, and this was not on the part of the people who were trying to recruit individuals, and I know that you really wanted this to be a stakeholder, a voice-driven process. It was very challenging, in fact, to populate this, much more so than what we've experienced in other processes with other school systems. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think that's important in the data when we get to sort of the data trends and finding that it is a compilation of what we did here.
Any opinion as to why you think that was?
Well, I think that would probably require a little more, I don't want to make a lot of inferences, but to your point, Mr. Carlson, I think the lack of data is data in and of itself, which would suggest something else is there. And so we didn't dive into that, but that was somewhat interesting that it was much harder to recruit voice in that process. Okay. All right. I'm going to then pass it over to my colleague.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the how the report is laid out, but then also the successes and the challenges we saw. So you can see that we looked at trends and findings across programming and placement, which is like if placement is the classes that the students would go to, that would be the placement. Service delivery, how you're actually delivering special education services, instructional practices, and we really got to see this when we were in the classroom. What does it look like? How are the teachers delivering instruction? Communication and collaboration. In any school district, communication is a really important piece of what happens on a day-to-day basis. And then our recommendations are in 3 particular areas, and we look at asset-based. What do you have that's working really well? Because then you can build upon that instead of, throwing out the baby with the bath, so to speak. What is the root cause for some of the trends that we saw? Not just what does it look like, but what we believe is causing that, and then how we think you can build some capacity within your school system. So this is kind of the highlights of the successes and the challenges. So there's no doubt that you have really hardworking teachers. They really care about the students. That came across not only in the classrooms, but when we met with staff, even like from the top down, from administrative all the way down to when the students were talking about their teachers. You really have some hardworking, very dedicated. They want to solve problems for students and help them grow. So that, that's a great place to start. You have a nice continuum of services. So I don't know how familiar you are with that phrase. That is a special education phrase, but we talk about that like when you think of a continuum in special ed, it's all the way from general education for a student with really very little supports in place, all the way down to students who might need to be residentially placed outside of their home. And then, but within the building, it looks like general education. Then we have you have a great co-teaching model, which is also one of the strengths. Then you have special education classes, and you have a variety of levels within those special education classes. So then I mentioned you have a really strong co-teaching model. So what does that look like? A special ed teacher and a gen ed teacher in the same classroom at the same time, delivering instruction and support to students. And you really do. It's in many of the classes we were in, it was like, well, which one is the special ed teacher? Which one is the gen ed teacher? That's when you know it's working, when you have to ask that question and it isn't apparent which one is which, right? And then your transition program for the students who are 18 to 22, who have more significant needs, that's also a real strength in the district. You also have a nice amount of voice. We really particularly heard with the parent population and the student population that they feel that they have a voice in the process of how their school year looks, how their classes look. And of course, the freshmen don't quite get it, right, when we met with them. But by the time they're juniors and seniors, it's really remarkable. Like, it's starting to play out. It was quite amazing to hear that. We also noted that the teachers are following the accommodations and modifications that are in the IEPs. And then a little bit surprising but kind of cool is the impact that Power School and Canvas are having in parents' lives, in students' lives, in terms of communication. That the parents talked about it, particularly Canvas, I think, came up, but then so did the students, that they can, communicate with their teachers, they can look back at their old IEPs, they're really using those online resources, so that's really cool. So now the challenges. So there's a little bit of a lack of personalization that we saw, and we will address that specifically and where that's happening, but there weren't sort of those distinguishing characteristics that let you know what made this student different from this student. Sorry. Over-reliance on some of the self-contained classes and not having more of them in gen ed. And of course, you also have an over-reliance on the outplacement. You have more students outplaced than most of the neighboring districts. You use a case manager model where you only have a few people that are responsible for writing the IEPs, so they have really large caseloads. And your 2 special education leaders also have a caseload because they case manage the students that are outplaced, and you have only 2 people. So you have those 2 people doing the job of kind of running the special ed programming for the district and also trying to case manage all the students that are outplaced. You're spreading them pretty thin. Underutilization of the paraprofessionals. They're not being actively utilized in many, many classes. There has been some challenges in getting staff trained in the last few years. And then we did notice kind of that communication gap from both sides. We really saw it, we heard it from administration, but then we also heard it from the teaching staff. And then just general improvements needed in how do we educate all students within our classrooms. And then finally, we did see some lack of engagement in students, heads down, not really attending to what was going on in the classroom, and very little, for whatever reason, prompting by teaching staff for the kids to pay attention, or, trying to find ways to get them involved. So
Was
those
that-
were,
Sorry, could I
Yeah,
just clarify the
please do.
engagement? Was that generally, or was that special ed classes?
I would say that we saw that generally, so. Okay, any other questions with any of those so far? Okay.
And the report goes into far more detail on all of those challenges and successes. So there's several pages within the report that cover all of those. We just went to the highlight reel. So I think those are starting on page 8 through page 11. Any other questions or wonders about again, we tried to pull out some of the key pieces and do a little synthesis there. But Mr. Carlson, certainly I would say that you asked that question. The sending, receiving communication piece, part of that I think also was part of that finding of the challenge of, trying really hard to recruit folks, and, maybe some misunderstanding of who got information, who didn't get information. So, and I will say that we heard this both as I'm trying to send stuff and get no response, or I didn't think I received something I didn't know was my responsibility to respond back. So there was a lot of that piece that we heard throughout the system. Any other questions or wonders before we move into recommendations? Dun, drum roll, please. Okay, hold on, I got lots of paper. Okay, so we have 3 large overarching recommendations. In determining recommendations, we do try to give any system, and these are system-focused recommendations, things that, again, become root causes. We want to recommend things that solve problems at the root, not just slap Band-Aids on top of things, but rather really look at what can truly move your system. So the first recommendation, and one in particular that I know that you had asked us to look at, would be the things around some of those outplacements, and certainly in there, and some of the data is the expenditures on outplacements that are currently being budgeted for the system. So starting with creating a 3-year plan to guarantee high-quality LRE district placements. Now, let me explain what all that means, because I want to make sure that this does address that. It's that over-reliance that Janelle mentioned on outplacement and or some of your more protected special ed sections, those being used more frequently than they need to be. But in fact, moving students into more of those general ed placements. So LRE, the least restrictive environment. Your least restrictive environment for all special ed students would be general ed. So how to create those. So our recommendation is definitely to start to reduce the dependency on those self-contained or outplacement programs. But in order to do that, you need more in-home placements where they would be appropriate. So it doesn't mean just bring people back and throw them in rooms and they're not ready for that, but really to make sure that you're increasing those options within district placement. And I'll tell you, these are within easy reach. We did see, and the reason why we like to go into the gen ed is to say, to what degree is gen ed a placement where we can have those students there? And we did see this is absolutely within reach, so that you can start to build that, but it's going to take a little more time for staff. Back to staff training, there's been lack of dedicated training towards understanding some of the needs for special ed students for all staff. That's going to have to be part of that plan. So offering more flexible scheduling to address some of the gen ed barriers. Some of the issues that often come up are things like how many seats are available in any one classroom. If you don't know this, I'll give you the rule of thumb is that you, especially when you're creating a more inclusive environment, you don't want to go over 30% of the students with special ed needs in one classroom. So making sure that those balance within some of those gen ed sections are there, which means you kind of have to think about that in terms of scheduling and sectioning. And then higher value within those special ed resources to provide similar type services versus and addressing some of that instructional pedagogy. So really looking at where your value you have in terms of investment into your program pieces. But the 3-year plan, and I will tell you this is, it's not a plan that we are saying you have to do. It is back to what what Danny was mentioning is that you need a committee, and all of this says you need a committee to set stuff up and say, okay, let's do a voice-driven process. But on pages 14 and 15, there is some suggestions of things that you may want to do over the 3 years to start to work on this, including starting with, very similar to when I was listening to the conversation around changing graduation requirements. If you were to do that, you often start with your lowest cohort of students and start to gradually move things out. So then you have some attrition with students who have experienced something different. Hence why we're recommending a little bit longer of a way to move into these programming. And essentially what you want to start to see, so if you had some data points, you'd want to start to see more students having those gen ed placements over time. But again, these are appropriate placements, and not to discount this idea, and we put this in the report, that there are many students that may absolutely need, and it's appropriate for them to be outplaced. It's just the question of how many in-placement options are available within your district is that big wonder. Yeah.
So I was one of those board members that noted the, what I think is a large outplacement number here. Did you gain any insight into why that may have happened? For instance, sometimes parents perceive it to be the answer, and it's just easier to make it so than it is to push back on a parent concern, or our lack of being able to adequately fund special ed programming within the school, or lack of staffing available. Special ed staff are hard to come by. Was there any, it takes a while to get to this point. I knew it was high. Was there any insight in how we got here?
There was some, we didn't go into a ton of historical information. There was anecdotal, and certainly anecdotal stories that we heard around sort of some programs that used to exist that no longer exist. And I will tell you, and I'm not saying this is the reason, but certainly I think student behavior, and this is across the state, across the country, tends to push, I think, systems into a little bit more of, reactive mode, and we're not really sure how to handle that. The other thing I will just name personally is that I do know that without a strong, robust MTSS system, which says, okay, we're here to respond to all students, sometimes then what ends up happening is that it's easier to move kids to a lower level than it is to address those issues at that gen ed setting. So then what ends up happening,
PSS,
yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, multi-tiered
guessing.
system of support
That was
where, yes, thank you, sorry, I know, there's so many acronyms, where then essentially the system responds to all kids, whether they have a disability or they have some other need, or really they're just a kid, right? And I think all kids at some point in time need some help and support from the adults in their lives. That's why we have our educational systems here to help us with that. So I think there's a lot of factors that kind of play into that. Sometimes I will say, and I'm not gonna name it that necessarily is what I heard here, but adult comfort, sometimes it's easier just to say, let's have someone else manage those problems versus us trying to say, how are we going to really resolve them here? And those become, I think, some interesting conversations just around inclusive education when we're talking about special ed students. How do we continue to include them in the general ed setting, even if some of those students might have the difference between those cognitive needs versus those behavioral needs? I know it's not quite the exact answer you were looking for, but I think we definitely saw those issues. Did you want to add anything else?
I would just say the other thing is, it's really hard, having, sat as an assistant of student services, it's really hard to just start bringing kids back and having that, because parents are usually fairly satisfied with the education the students are getting outside, which is part of the reason we also are saying that it needs to be the process where you start by having programming that does not send as many students out, and then over the 3 years, the higher numbers should start to come down.
Yeah, that was a subset of my point, is it's gonna take us a while to get out of this, and you have to build the programming first and staff it and fund it and make physical spaces. Yeah, and out of a point of practicality, we may even have had to go this direction anyway, because CEDAL I mean, everyone's having trouble with staffing. It's hard, my understanding, to even find outplacement availability these days. So, in addition to it being best to have kids in their home school and in their communities with their peers and neighbors. So I just was curious how we got here, because it may have been our own doing. Like, I mean, we just had to cut programming or whatever. So, no, you gave me the answer that I was looking for, so thank you.
Would I be correct in summarizing what you're saying here is don't necessarily pull kids back all at once, but put fewer people into the pipeline gradually? Okay.
And then start to address that in you have to address what the system is going to need to do that successfully. You want the students to feel that they're being successful. You want the adults to feel like they're being successful as well. So it needs to be a both. And so I think it's going to take a little bit of time. And we did outline at least some considerations for a committee that you could pull together that includes the system needs, like what would your system need in year one of this 3-year, and what would your staff need in this year one, including looking at curriculum. And I will say that 4th or 5th bullet point down, there's lots of research that would suggest that there is a higher value of including students with special needs and disabilities into the gen ed sections, that in fact you're going to get the same results. If you just look at the special ed students' academic results, you're going to get the same, if not better, results than if you were to continue to use self-contained or outplaced classes. So the truth is that you're still going to get that, and you're investing in your programs in your own building, right? It's versus sending the money out to some other place. You're in some ways not investing in building this, right? So to your point is the number of years you continue to do that, you have left the rest of the system without sort of learning how to manage and continue to educate different types of learner variability.
Along the same subject of bringing people in or putting less people outside of this programs, did you look at those that we do currently outplace, and did you see a subgroup, or were you able to, or did you even look at it, I guess is the first question, but then was there a subgroup or category of outplacements that would easily transition back into our environment that like made up a large, or is it a lot of different, I mean, I'm just curious, like, is there a common denominator of types of outplacements that we're doing that would be quote unquote easily solvable in-house at some point after many, many years of bringing them back? Or is it all over the place? Or I'm just trying to figure out what it looks like. Is that a fair question? I'm not even sure if that's a fair question for you.
So I would, and I didn't look specifically for what you're asking.
Okay,
Okay, so now
Fair
I'm
enough.
just gonna make a general statement.
fair enough.
Typically, the students that are placed out typically are the students that are having a significant amount of mental health issues, and how are they responding to them, right?
That was my
is
concern, actually.
Typically,
Yeah,
across-
behavioral.
Sometimes it's behavioral, like the outward behavior, but sometimes
Or
it's
manifestation,
internalizing
right.
behaviors, right? Concerns about safety, the personal safety. So, and I'm just speaking kind of
Fair enough,
broadly
fair enough.
across, because you have an excellent transition program, which means you also have an excellent for kids that have cognitive impairments, right? So you have strong programming for that group. So it those tend to be the ones, are the kids with the emotional. And then going back to the tier 1, the MTSS, right? How are we addressing mental health for all students? And it is a crisis right now, partly because of the pandemic, right?
Well, and
So-
we knew that when we passed the referendum, that was one of the biggest concerns we had too, so, yeah,
It goes well
That's my
beyond special
concern.
education,
Yeah.
right?
thank you.
I would also add to that, Tony referenced that CEDL is having a hard time with staffing and reevaluating their programming and offerings. Their administrative team has given us kind of the looking forward, these are the groups of students that are most likely to be successful as you think about internalizing. I think they're providing that list for most school districts that they provide services to, because they're
So we can send at this, I
I
mean,
believe
they've
it,
always
yeah.
somewhat limited it, but it's recently a hot topic. And I go to those quarterly meetings and it's tough. Like, they're struggling to staff these programs and are cutting back on how many kids we can send there. So it worries me a little bit, because there are going to be kids that legitimately would benefit from that programming that we're helping to support, like we're a member district. But the spots are fewer and fewer, so,
We're gonna get capped beyond
well, yeah,
what we
so
hopefully would need.
so it just leads to the question of scrutinizing who we're placing, and are the right kids in the right spots, and what can we bring back in-house, which for some kids, because of modeling, you know, if it might be a better option, they may rise to the occasion with peers, so.
For environment, right? Yep, I agree. Thank you for.
Sure. Okay, so recommendation number 2 of 3 is we mentioned the case manager and the caseload that we identified as a challenge. So this one is really to restructure the current case manager model and realign. Of course, anytime you do that, you're going to have to realign roles and responsibilities of the special education staff. So Warren's model that's currently being used is a factor in what is limiting that individualization that we mentioned. And so because there's so many kids on a case manager's caseload, it's impossible to start to get personalized at that point. So really, empirical evidence doesn't even support this version of the case manager model that's currently in functioning right now. That would then redefine case manager model that would offer a stronger student-centered operationalizing of those of that IEP process. Of course, anytime you change any of that stuff, it is going to demand some realignment of roles of special ed staff. So in other words, who's doing what versus the other types of tasks that people are doing. All leaders and teachers certified and classified will then will require some adjustments. Special education leadership in particular is extremely thin for a district of this size. So again, the fact that you have leaders who are case managers, that is problematic. And I do think that has contributed to some of the other issues that we're seeing within the system, because if you don't have someone watching some of those things that need to happen because they're doing all these other things, you end up with people who have impossible tasks to get stuff done, and things often, you address the things on the front burner, which the good news is that I'm going to tell you, it was definitely about supporting kids and parents, because we heard that. The kids and parents were happy. Like, back to, like, one of the highlights was they feel that people listen to them and that the teachers bend over backwards to help them. But I think, to what end did that then also start to create some of these other challenges within your system?
Curiosity, are these conclusions with your experience and knowledge you came to, or were these, well, I mean, yes, otherwise it wouldn't have ended up here, but were they also ones that our own staff were saying the exact same thing, and maybe just you're externally validating what they've been saying forever, and we're just hearing it now because you're amplifying that voice?
Yes, so we did hear this, and again, for things to rise to our report, we need to hear it from multiple data sources, and especially with the stakeholder groups, how do we hear those things? So we did hear from all kinds of different stakeholders, this echoing of a similar thing. Now, obviously, anytime you talk about changing people's jobs, I'm not quite sure they necessarily said that part, but maybe they definitely said things around like, all right, this is an impossible job, and these things are not working. So again, it's back to, what do we restructure, right? So, and I think that's the part that, again, our recommendation, it says it in the report, is to bring a team of people together. So if you are an impacted individual, come to the table. Let's talk about what works. They identified this as a challenge as well. The question is then, how do we move from where we are now? What's the forward movement? How do we make that different?
To what degree are you restructuring versus increasing resources?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because I think the second you start to adjust roles and responsibilities, it's interesting to see how you can repurpose certain roles and tasks and job duties. So I think it's hard to answer that right now. I suspect you're probably still, depending on where you go, looking at maybe adding some FTE to the table, but maybe not as much as people think. It depends on how things get restructured and what some of those agreements are. But I think that that's going to take a team to take a look at. Janelle, did you want to add anything else to that?
No, I think that's like I could do that if I was in doing the work and telling you, okay, we're gonna take this and we're gonna put this person here and this person there. But just to do that from this balcony seat, that's like impossible for us to predict. I would say how much staff would have
Got to
to
try this
change.
seat. Go ahead.
See the balcony from here.
And then our last recommendation actually encompasses both 1 and 2. In order to make 1 and 2 successful, there needs to be staff development on special education, and I make this for everyone. I emphatically will state everywhere that all kids are gen ed kids first. Special ed students and special ed programming is a service to general education. It is everyone's responsibility to understand this. So there is a need for some strong faculty, and there was strong faculty request for this recommendation to increase really overall skills and mindset for addressing all students with learning needs. All kids can learn at high levels, maybe in different ways, and they may have learner variability, but they all can be in any classroom. Building a shared understanding around success criteria for all students, especially students with disabilities. In fact, I think that sometimes there's a misunderstanding around students with disabilities. Even like, I think the easiest one to understand is a student who's in a wheelchair doesn't mean they have a cognitive impairment. And I'll be honest, there's sort of some gray areas where I think people make a lot of assumptions that really need to be rethought about. Clarity on job roles and responsibilities, and built shared ownership for all students learning. We all should be worried about educating all students and making sure that I'm a teacher and I can teach any learner, any type of learner, and I should welcome any type of learner into my classroom, which is really that collaborative approach to ensure trust too. I do think there was some inklings of some trust around some of these conversations about things, or even it was kind of interesting, we're here to look at, the special ed programming. It's like, oh, well, I don't do that. I'm like, oh, everybody does that. My perspective is we all do that. We all need to worry about that. And proactively addressing both. So there's that MTSS again. So the multi-tiered system of support, which is state mandated that we have in place, that we have supports for all kids, interventions and any type of support, no matter whether they have a disability or not, and where that comes together with special education and strategies for building that for all kids, and that a student with a disability also might need an MTSS intervention as well. Like, we can have all of those things. So I think there's just a stronger understanding amongst all faculty around that, which I just think undergirts recommendation 1 and 2. When we have full staff understanding all of that, I think that makes this all a whole lot easier, and people start to understand where those pieces come into play. Okay, so those are them. Oh, you wanted to add?
I'm just gonna add one thing. The other thing is that if you only try to change your special ed programming and you do not change any of your general ed programming, you will not be successful in changing special ed. It has to start with changes to the general ed programming. And it always, because those are the most vulnerable students, those are the places where that's the Band-Aid, right? You see the problems coming out in the students with disabilities, but it is just reflective of underlying things that you need to address with general education.
So when you say that, when you say general ed programming, is that the mindset
Some of it is that.
specifically, is it the curriculum?
Yep,
Some of it is that?
Yep.
It's the
some of it's
how we
training.
deal with behaviors in a
Yep.
classroom? Okay, so we're just talking about the general classroom atmosphere.
I can give you an example, and this was years ago. I worked with another high school system and had a similar conversation about this. That the science biology course is like, well, we set up labs for every biology class, and they have to do the lab on Tuesday. And if they don't do the lab on Tuesday, they miss the lab. And I was like, so that was so tight that it wasn't open to allow variability, right? Even in general ed, like, okay, so what happens then? So that's an example of sometimes the system itself in the mindset of, well, this makes it easier to orchestrate things, and there was probably a whole lot of really good rationale behind that. But the problem with that gen ed setting is that it was making that a very closed system for kids to belong with any kind of learner variability, regardless of whether you have a disability or not, just any learner variability. So I think the more that you can build a gen ed setting that allows for more of that flexibility to reach success and that definition of success. So I think each system will have to take a look at where in the system some of that tightness is that could be loosened up to allow for flexibility.
Okay, and then my second question is when we talk about staff requesting education, feeling like they need more education, things like, was there any review of the education that we've provided recently or in the past? And did you feel like that was, adequate, needed, 100% improve? Like, is there any, can you speak to what we have been doing? Because I could say, at my job, I need education, right? Because I have to do different things, but they might say, well, we did these trainings. So where are we with our performance of the education specifically? Like,
The voice data we heard,
yeah, that's anecdotal.
anecdotal,
Right? Yeah,
became part of our challenge bullet point on the two-way communication problem.
right?
So we heard a lot of mixed messages between we never got anything, we aren't given anything, to we offered stuff and nobody wanted anything. And so again, it was a lot of misunderstanding. But I will say that I think there was at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was some consensus that over the last couple of years, it didn't rise to a priority. Like there's so many things that was not necessarily one of them that was pushed. Instead, there were other priorities that full staff education was around. But then there was some mixed communication, that two-way mixed communication between sending and receiving of what is available. Now, I will say even such things as we mentioned, the paraprofessionals being underutilized, there was definitely a sense that group was not educated as much. And I will tell you, one of the things to really think about too is how to increase their skill set, and you do that through professional development, and then also making sure that you have stronger utilization.
I accept that. But one of the topics that have come up several times has been our paraprofessional turnover rate. And would you compare that to other districts you review or you look at? Is that higher, lower, the same? When we talk about education, they have to be here to be educated. So if you have turnover 24/7, is that contributing to this inability to really like retain and educate and train? Or is it just our lack of?
Yeah, I can't talk about your because we didn't look at that, so I
didn't
don't
look
know
at it,
your
okay.
turnover rate in that one. Obviously, it's a variable to keep in mind, because absolutely. But the only thing I can say is often sometimes when people feel more connected and feel like they're a part of a system, they stay longer than whatever, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to add anything else? Yeah.
I would just say that many districts echo some of the same frustrations with their paraprofessionals. They're either not staying, or they can't find enough of them, or, so as unemployment falls, right? People go on to other jobs that pay better or that have less responsibilities, so.
I guess
do
I'm wondering
think-
if your concerns about the paraprofessionals not being, is that, any different than anywhere else you go, or is that about the same level of? concern?
I would say that it was more of a concern here than I see other places.
Thank you. Okay.
And that again is a two-way street because the staff need to also understand how to utilize a paraprofessional. And sometimes that is also part of the learning is what does that really mean? And so I think it's both.
Lump that into training, right, for.
Yeah.
I got you.
But before you go, I want you to make me feel better.
Okay.
Don't do it.
Not your job.
You used words, I mean, we started out at the get-go, you couldn't get enough people to participate. That says one thing.
Yep.
You've used the word trust
Yep.
repeatedly. Who doesn't trust who? What can we do about it?
You don't have to answer that.
Well, now that's like a whole
Some
nother
of this-
training I do,
Maybe
Mr.
that's an unfair
Carlson.
question, I don't know.
Well, if,
I'm the layman on this board, so
may I
try to-
offer though, if it's gonna involve specific groups or specific people, we should push that into
Yeah.
executive session.
No, I
not
don't
in
worry. I
open
wasn't
session,
going to
so.
go down.
Yeah, I know
I
you've
wasn't
been doing this
getting
long enough to
trapped
know,
into
but-
that. I said there's.
Yeah.
But I can say that one of the things, and in fact, working in not just this system but all over, is to remember that I think it starts with the fact that you all asked and invited a voice-driven process. Any change that does come about, I think when impacted individuals are part of the conversation from the front end, is the beginning of trusting when that change type things happen. One thing to keep in mind though, because there was such small turnout though, is I think reminding anyone, if you're an impacted individual, like be part of the process, but then we also have to honor that we're gonna take voice seriously and not have pseudo participation and pseudo voice, meaning we heard you and then we're just going to do whatever we want anyways. Which, by the way, there may be times that there are command decisions. We have to do this because it says so. State code says this. Like name those things. Here are the things people do have a voice and choice around, and here are things that we don't. Or even saying we have to make these decisions, but here are the ones that we do want your input on and allow for that to happen. And again, I'm just talking globally, generally, whatever would happen. I think that's the way to start building back full staff trust in any system, anywhere. So that was my big softball pitch right back to you.
And it takes time. The other thing is it takes time to build trust. Years, time as in years. It's not something that it's just going to be 3 months from now, it's all fixed, right? It will be years of building that back up to a level that everybody feels good about that.
Were your meetings within the contractual day or after school?
They were all planned within, that was part of the extensive planning time that we took to do that, to make sure that staff had that within, I think it was.
Opportunity on the clock existed.
Yeah, and it was
for
during
participation.
I think it was the Wednesday, what was that, Kara? Wednesday late starts. Yeah, Wednesday late starts. So it wasn't something that somebody had to give up that time. It was something that was portioned out already, part of their day. Okay, all right. Well,
you.
thank you all very much.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Moving on, I move to approve the consent agenda items as presented, which includes personnel recommendations per Exhibit A numbers 61 through 67 as posted, and personnel recommendations per Exhibit B numbers B 241 through B 243 as posted. The payment of bills dated January 16th, 2024 in the amount of $6,249,305.76, regular meeting minutes and executive session minutes of December 19th, 2023, the second reading and approval of district board policies and exhibits, and the resolution naming Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Services as local school board authorized representative for submission of grants. Roll call vote, please. I need a second, please.
Second.
Roll call.
Natalia.
Motion by Carlson, second by Martinez. Mrs. Pope,
Yes.
Mrs. Squires,
Yes.
Mr. Demonte,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez,
Yes.
Mr. Carlson.
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Discussion items, A, the strategic plan. Any?
So I'm bringing just a second draft back of what I would call plan on a page. I would like to continue to get better as an organization at focusing our improvement efforts and starting with the school board. So differences from the last time after I met with you and then met with the school improvement team right before the winter break. I've tried to simplify our targets. You'll see targets in there that mostly focus on on-track rates as well as some resiliency traits around emotional regulation, student sense of belonging, and then employee engagement. Action plans that are slightly different this year, or this round, instead of really focusing on or discussing, I guess we're in discussion phase, discussing a focus on family welcome center. Maybe we're just focusing on how do we involve families in some of the decision-making conversations that we have. I don't know exactly how to do that. That might be a heavy lift that the board wants to take on, is how do we involve different families, different parents or grandparents in conversations that we have around school improvement. And then I've been trying to meet with some just local kind of regional leaders that work with some of our families and students. And one of the individuals I met with, I think during the break, really pushed me to think differently about how we support students who can't figure out the system isn't working for. And he shared that as much as we want to reach out to families and parents and help them understand how to support their students, he said a lot of times the students that need our attention the most, their parents are already doing as much as they can, or their grandparents, whoever the caretakers are already doing as much as they can. And the caretakers in some ways are putting even more trust in our system than traditionally successful student families are, because those caretakers, their plate is already so full, and their own experience in high school, it wasn't one where their parents were necessarily supportive or active, and they feel like they're actually increasing the amount of support and resources that they're able to provide for their children. And so some of the push I've been getting is, you might not want to necessarily put a whole bunch of resources into outreach to parents other than to get their voice in decisions, but it might be better for individuals to just be providing the type of support that those students need, that we wish parents would provide, but most likely aren't going to have the bandwidth, time, and energy to do that because they've got so much else on their plate. So we've been kicking around this idea of a new student champion staff member, and visiting Mundelein High School at the end of the month to see how they work. They have a student champion, and the programming that individual provides through, I think it's called the MBK program, through the Obama Foundation, which is just an outreach program, a national outreach program for minority young men. But we can hopefully learn something from that with what they're doing in Mundelein. Let's see. Yes. Yeah.
How about going through the different clubs that we have, like minority clubs that we have, and seeing, who can we pull in through those clubs? Like the BSU and Avanza.
To be helpers to other students, you mean?
Yes, and to see how they can help us with that outreach.
I do think that there is somewhere in here some discussion around clubs and activities, and continuing to think about that and to push that and to provide support for that. In addition to trying to see what can they help us with in terms of our goals, I think we need to be talking through how do we support them, because we do need places that students feel engaged with and connected with and belonging with. There are some really interesting community groups here in the region that are able to find ways to help students. They're able to build a community of trust with young individuals, that school districts are struggling in the same way trying to do that. So I think clubs and activities, there's a lot probably there that I'll relook at too. let's see, I do have, this isn't new, but we do have a bullet point under diversity, equity, inclusion for student or special education audit recommendations. Part of, I think, what they were talking about tonight is recognizing that inclusion isn't just, it includes, I think, what do they call it, learning diversity, neurodiversity. And so I'm putting that under that diversity category. I have heard from a good number of staff and our principals. We're getting some feedback most recently about some type of early intervention with vaping that we don't have right now, and there might be a possibility for a partnership with the township on that. And then under academic excellence, I tweaked some of the verbiage around interventions to really get into what we're hearing from staff around the types of training that they would like is department specific, classroom specific, and also talking with them about different ways that we can have departments have more ownership with the interventions that we're running. So we're kicking around some of those ideas. Mostly what I'm curious about in terms of feedback from the board right now would be our annual targets. And if there are things at this point in the game, so it's January, I don't necessarily need to finalize strategies right now, but as I'm putting strategies on here so you can see the types of things we're thinking about, but I want to make sure that you feel like the targets that we're looking at, and when you're asking me to come back with improved metrics, are these the right things? So there's heavy reliance on track, which is just pass rate, basically. How many students are passing the classes they're taking. Some of those resilient measures, employee engagement. And then under academic excellence, there is also some enrollment data and targets.
Can you remind me how do we measure student emotion regulation ability?
Yeah, so twice a year, students take a survey. So it's their own perceptions of themselves and how they handle those. There's probably like 50 different questions that they're answering, and there's maybe 4 or 5 for each of those categories that are out
That's
there
their
right now.
assessment of their own ability to
Correct.
regulate.
Is that voluntary? Do they all do it or what?
They all do it. I guess they could just say, I don't want to do it, and they could choose
But
not
the
to.
overwhelming majority do it.
Yeah, we have time allocated for them in a class to do it.
Having said that, you know, we do have a very academic annual target for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe a subjective goal would be nice. Also, a survey, maybe of the student population that includes how they feel they're being included. That might partner with what you already do, but just to kind of round that out a little bit, because I think your comment was, you know, it's very specific to the on track, but how the kids feel is probably even more important than that. So
Great. It's good
just a
feedback.
thought.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I will work that in.
Another quick thought, I know the health department has ample resources to deal with things like vaping. I mean, you know, you talk to Township, maybe they'll offer the facility, but the health department will have people and they'll send you and they'll have data and programs. They're very big on non-smoking, and this is an adjunct to that.
Appreciate that. I will look into that.
Like you're saying, having someone come do an assembly?
They'll have somebody come. They have counselors and everything else that would come and do this. I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but Lake County, the smoke-free Lake County was very much put across by a group of students. They were called, what would they call them? Oh boy, I don't remember the name now, but it was students, and I know there was an active chapter at Warren Township. And they would go to the Gurney Park District and they would put a giant bag of cigarette butts on the desk and say, we gathered this in your park district in 3 hours. As a result, the county board was able to pass smoke-free Lake County. But I mean, you know, I know that the health department is highly involved in that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And it was through students. Reality Illinois, they called it.
Under continuous improvement, where it says leader connections for quick data, what does that mean?
So we give, there are really 2 aspects of Leader Connections. One is we provide every staff member with an opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with an administrator. We ask them 4 questions: what's going well, what types of things can we improve, do you have all the resources you need, And is there anybody that you think we should celebrate because they're doing above and beyond? And they take some general notes from that, and then monthly in a leadership meeting, once a month in one of our leadership meetings, we take half an hour and go through themes from that. The second part of that is we do a similar process, but in like a group setting at least once a year with every staff member.
So you're saying the themes that come out of that are a quick source of, okay.
Anything else?
Appreciate the feedback.
Action items.
Nope, 10-year facility plan.
10-year facility plan. I'm losing my track here.
Mhm.
There we go. Thank you. Chris Green.
So this evening in your materials, there are 2 documents for the 10-year facility plan. We did add the narrative that I'm going to share with you a couple hours ago. So since the administration shared the document with you back in December, the administration has continued to refine the long-range plan. Long-range plans are fluid, living documents that should be reviewed annually, and some items will be reprioritized as conditions change or as the district's priorities change. The first document, the long-range facility plan, is sorted by building and then priority and lists an estimated cost for most of the items. The estimated cost without fees is a high-level number. The scope and a final understanding of the work that needs to be done will need additional review and input. This is normally done at the time a work item is considered to be undertaken. Under normal budget planning, you would add an additional 20% for consulting fees and contingencies. As far as priority, the board indicated their desire to participate in prioritization of the projects. The administration has provided an initial prioritization. This is to aid the board in understanding the condition and urgency of these items. The initial prioritization is a starting point and was developed separately from determining what the district could afford on an annual basis. We're not quite there yet. So for the prioritization codes, if you look over, I think it's column 9. Under column 9, the priority 0 are items that are already planned for the summer of 2024, and most of the work has been bidded out. Priority 1 are items that are the most important to maintain the integrity and operation of the building. Priority 1 is primarily conditions that are life safety, student safety, roofs, mechanicals, electrical, plumbing, and masonry. This type of work can be anticipated and needs to be planned far in advance due to the typical useful life and needs and the needs that need to be planned for. So under 1, we've got 1A, 1B, 1C, all the way through 1E. 1A are items that are to be completed in either 2026 or 2027. B is 28 or 29. C is either 2030, 31, or 32. D is year 30, 33, or 34. And 1E are items to be completed in year 30, 35, or beyond. Then there's a priority 2 code. These are the remaining doors, flooring, window seals, ceilings, and stair treads. Priority 3 are general washroom renovations, lockers. You'll see a number of items on there that have like cracks in walls. So those are priority 3. You'll also see that there are question marks. Those are items that are still under investigation. We have a number of plumbing items where they say dead end pipe. and we don't know what that pipe is. So those are items we're still investigating to determine what they are and if we need to repair them or what we need to do with those items. Then there'll be items that are identified as TBD, and these are projects that would warrant further discussion with the board. Typically, they are improvements to facilities that are not related to maintaining the integrity of the building and student environment. Items like that would be the discussion that we've had about the locker room. Right now, it's a TBD because we're starting to move on it, but we haven't come to final decisions. And then the second document is a chart summarizing the costs of the projects by priority. The costs are broken down by building and work category. The TBD projects are summarized to the far right of the totals. Please keep in mind that the items the district added during our review, because we did get input from several groups saying, well, you should probably think about this, or this project probably needs to be done soon. So when we added those projects, we don't have an estimated cost for those projects. If the board is in favor of considering these projects, the administration can seek an estimated cost. So it's a big document. There's a lot of items on it. There's a lot of priorities. There's a lot of estimated costs. But at this point,
Pages.
at this point, the administration needs some direction from the board. Does the board want to have further discussion about the priorities in the plan, or would the board like the administration to complete a more detailed list tying the projected work by year with our financial resources?
Rather than see something we might be able to do, yeah.
Okay, so all these things that are category one, there's lots of category one, are things that need to be done to keep the building safe.
Right.
And they're in these A, B, C, D columns based on when we expect.
Right, because some of them
They
are
will
like
become
HVAC
unsafe.
systems, and they have a longer life, so they may not, like there might be 3033, they don't, the life of that HVAC system could go out like another 10 years. So that's,
A little bit of a question mark.
right,
Sometimes we call those building envelope issues, so we just need to structurally keep things working.
Yep. So why do doors and window seals and ceilings and stair treads not fall into category one?
because like the electrical and the plumbing and the heating, that's more with the building envelope.
Okay.
Doors, while some of them are life safety and we need to address those, doors don't absolutely have to be done. Stair treads, like unless it's a trip hazard, they don't, wouldn't need to be done, and that's why they're a low priority.
Bid for those right now, don't we?
Yes, and those are ones that definitely need to be done.
Trip hazard.
Yep. So,
Just in life safety, right? So we're
Yes.
addressing the life safety already, so.
correct.
Heard a large investment in like filler or caulk because cracks I heard weren't going to be addressed to like 33, 34. So if I see a crack, I might as well name
Tony's
the crack.
retiring.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like there's going to be a crack in the wall that I'll see now for the next 15 years. That was highly disappointing. But
If it is a, if
it
it's
almost
a
makes you want to
structural,
like raise the school and just start over. But
yeah, if it's a structural issue, then we would address it right away. But if it's just
Thank you.
some kind of settling that, there's a hairline crack or something, it's not going to be addressed immediately.
feel better about that stuff.
Yeah, I bet you do.
So your question, would you restate?
So the question is, do you want to have further discussion about how this report is prioritized right now? Or do you want the administration to come back next month with dollar amounts to where we would do projections and try to tie what we have available in resources on year-by-year basis and what projects we can tie into those resources.
I'm gonna take a wild guess and say we'd like you to do the work.
Okay,
2.
Yeah,
B, yeah, I said B,
okay, all right,
This is very helpful.
yes.
Thank
right.
you.
all right.
A lot of work.
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah, this is a lot of work, and I do want to just give a shout out to Chris here for all the work that she's been doing the last couple months as a brand new person here to the organization, wrapping her head around that.
This is the peanut gallery back there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay, the next one's heavy duty, the school board meeting schedule.
All
Anybody?
right,
We
Thanksgiving.
got one vote here already.
No, but
Mr.
Thanksgiving
Anderson?
is on the week, the board meeting's on the week before Thanksgiving, so we're okay for 25. No,
Is it?
yeah, for 24, 25. Yeah, I already looked.
Well, all that
I don't
fuss.
believe you.
There you go.
Well, then look at your calendar
I
and then
can't.
compare it.
Well, I believe you. I'm just saying, in the future, it may not count this year, but everybody's off on Wednesday now too, so we're not having a meeting, but everybody's off the next day, so they may want to be.
Yeah, out.
Because is that right, Jean? So we have school on the 20th, 21st, and 22nd, but we don't have school on the 27th, 28th. Let's check that to make sure.
Yeah,
I
but
think Natalia's
our
right.
meeting's on the 19th.
19th.
Yeah,
So
I think
we're-
you're right.
The week before, yeah. This year was the week of Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Yes. So we did.
I was
is that
surprised
right?
by
Is
that
she
too.
right? So Jean and I did put a change in there for July because I think sometimes we struggled getting a quorum in July and we're wondering if having a later meeting in July will help.
Probably
we don't need,
not, but-
We don't need an answer now. It might not. But if you could go back and look at
I think later
summer
is better.
plans.
Yeah, later.
My experience is August is tougher to get people in than July, but I don't know.
No, because by then, we're already back in school and we're back
Okay.
on track.
All right. Those of you who are not retired,
Right.
all right.
He's always on vacation.
I'm always. Anybody have any problems with the calendar? Okay.
You guys have a board workshop next month. One of the things I know that feedback form is asking about is how effective meetings are. If this is a pitch, if you haven't filled out that feedback survey yet, let me know. I can resend you the link.
Yeah, resend
But
it, please.
you, depending on how y'all have the conversation at that workshop, you might start, depending on where the conversation goes, you might start talking about board meetings and do you want to change how you do board meetings? You might not, but we thought we'd give this to you early. You can have the workshop and then we'll bring it back to you later for approval.
Okay, number 10, action items. A, authorization to begin the budget for the 2024-2025 school year. It's in your attachment there. I move to approve the resolution for preparation of the budget for the 2024-2025 school year.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? Roll call.
Motion by Carlson, second by Martinez. Mrs. Pope,
Yes.
Mr. Demonte. Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Squires,
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez.
Yes.
Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Okay, now we have an approval for the Oak Plain campus roofing, and I have a blank here, so I think I need some fill-in here.
Yeah, so our recommendation is to approve the bid from DCG Roofing. We also have our friendly neighborhood roof consultant here. And go ahead,
Crowley.
Chris, if you want to add anything.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Crowley?
Sorry for making you come out in the cold weather.
He's been on roofs all day.
Could you just explain this, the alternate bid, we're doing something differently, it only applies to one section of roof, it's equally good but less expensive? What is that?
Glad you asked. I know you are.
Just felt like I should ask because I didn't understand any of that.
You know,
All right.
just since
Thank
you've
you.
made your way up to the microphone, I noticed there was pretty big discrepancy in some of the bids. Do you have any?
That's typical.
I understand that. I used to do food service bids and stuff, but you
It's
don't.
really typical of roofing. And it's
Okay.
really typical of roofing right now as we're coming out of the COVID and people have lost their backlogs.
Okay.
So, and that's
You
really
have no
what we're seeing.
concerns?
Roofing bids, it's like musical chairs.
Okay.
And so there's only so many chairs available. And the more costly, well, once you get the chair, then the price starts to go up. So, and once you fill your chairs, that's kind of how it works. That's pretty much it. So 2 guys had holes they wanted to fill, and they were within, I think, $10,000 of each other or something like that. And the other guys, they're cherry picking. I'll throw a number
They'll take
here,
it,
and if
yeah.
I get
See
it,
if I
then
get
I'll move
it.
this out of the way and make room for it. But otherwise, I've got my schedule set already.
That helps with the confidence of the low
Yeah.
bid. Thank you.
Any other questions?
One other thing I wanted to just throw in here, we're looking at using cameras this year, site cameras, which
Discussion.
will allow us to be able to view the work all the time. And
Can we tune in, Chuck? Could we tune in?
Is it gonna be a
Yes.
live cam?
absolutely, yeah, it'd be live cameras that
Is that
Like
like
watch-
watching
you
the
to
eagle
tune
in
in.
the nest?
Watching the eagle
Yeah.
today, all
there
right.
anytime and see what's
You
going
must
on.
be
For the
retired.
retirees on
Yeah,
the
I was
board.
gonna say,
Got nothing better to do, right? Okay.
Yep.
watch roofing
Thank you.
jobs.
Okay, I move to approve the Eau Plaine Campus Roofing Bid Phase 2 and award $1,863,335 as presented.
Second.
Have a second roll call.
Take care, Chuck.
Thank you.
See you, Chuck.
Stay warm.
Need a roll call, Gene?
Yes, I was just getting the rest of the motion down there. So it was a motion by Carlson and a second by Anderson, did I hear?
Martinez.
Natalia.
Yeah, you confuse them.
Hurry.
And
Our
that was
voices are similar.
for,
Our looks too.
the
Roofing bid.
Roofing Eau Plaine.
DCG Roofing Solutions
There wasn't in the resolution here, but, okay.
for
Yes.
$1,000,008.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion by Carlson, second by Martinez. Mrs. Squires,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Pope,
Yes.
Mr. Demonte,
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez,
Yes.
Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Okay, item C is approval of general renovations bid at both campuses. I move to approve the general renovations bid at both campuses and award, what number am I looking at, guys?
Construction Inc. at a cost of $888. Plus, are we recommending the alternate?
The alternate is 150,000. So the 888 is for stair treads and life safety doors.
So we're doing both? Okay. For DLA, determined that the apparent lowest qualified bidder was Construction Inc. and proposed a base bid of $888,000 and an alternate of $150,000 for replacement of additional doors and frames at the Eau Plaine campus. I make that motion.
Second.
Roll call.
Motion by Carlson, second by Anderson. Mr. Demonte,
Yes.
Mrs. Pope,
Yes.
Mrs. Squires,
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez. Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Item number D is approval of an estimate for window film at the Almond and Eau Plaine campuses. I move to approve the estimates for window film at the Almond and Eau Plaine campuses as presented.
Second.
Roll call.
Motion by Carlson, second by Martinez. Mrs. Squires,
Yes.
Mrs. Pope,
Yes.
Mr. Demonte,
Yes.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez,
Yes.
Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Item number E, we discussed this last month, if I recall. I move to close the inactive student activity accounts as presented. They're listed on your resolution, and I make that motion. Need a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Roll call?
Motion by Carlson, second by Pope. Mrs. Martinez,
Yes.
Mr. Demonte, Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Squires,
Yes.
Mrs. Pope, Mr. Carlson,
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Item number F is approval of board scholarships for 2024. I move to approve the board distribute
$4,000.
$4,000 for distribution and scholarships and Board of Education scholarships as presented. Second, please. Further discussion? Roll call, please. I was reverting.
Motion by Carlson, second by Pope. Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Squires?
Yes.
Mrs. Martinez?
Yes.
Mr. Demonte?
Yes.
Mrs. Pope?
Yes.
Mr. Carlson?
Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Item G is administration and non-union employee salary adjustments for FY '24. The motion is I move to approve the administration and non-union employment salary adjustments for 2024, FY 2024 as presented.
Second.
Further discussion? Roll call.
Motion by Carlson, second by Anderson. Mrs. Martinez?
Yes.
Mr. Demonte?
Yes.
Mrs. Squires?
Yes.
Mr. Pope? Mrs. Pope, I'm sorry.
I sound like Mr. Pope today. Yes.
My apology. Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Carlson?
Which way you call me Mrs. Carlson? Yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Okay, the most important
Get slap
motion in the meeting. I need a motion to adjourn. I'll make that motion. Second.
Second.
Further discussion, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Goodbye.
Aye.
Roll call, I know.
Motion by
You want a roll call
Carlson,
on an adjournment vote? Come on.
Second by Anderson. Mrs. Martinez?
Yes.
Mr. Demonte?
Yes.
Mrs. Squires? Mrs. Pope?
Yes.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Mr. Carlson?
All right,
Mr. Carlson?
yes.
6 yes, motion carries.
Bless you.
Hey, hey, hey,
Thank
hey
you.
now.
Have a good night.